And we are officially live. So once again, I want to thank both you, Dr. Mann and Elisa, for coming out today and chatting. But before we get started and before I do an introduction, I just wanted to mention that our thoughts and prayers are with those folks who are in the path of Hurricane Laura, and also to remember Jacob Blake and countless other, of our Black brothers and sisters who have faced injustices on a daily basis. And then, as always, we hope and demand for justice for Breonna Taylor and the arrest of the cops who killed her. So with that, we're going to just jump right into introductions. First, I want to introduce you, Dr. Mann. Dr. Christine Mann is a family practice physician in Cedar Park, Texas, with 30 years experience training and working in healthcare. She is the daughter and granddaughter of veterans, a wife and mother of 3, and was a single mother during medical school, and she was a small business owner for 11 years. Dr. Mann has been involved in various community service and political activities for 2 decades, working at the local, state, and federal levels to enact policies that benefit the community. She is a voter registrar and has worked on several local and state level campaigns, helping to elect Democrats in her district. She has served as a community volunteer for CASA and sat on the Williamson County American Heart Association Board of Directors. She is a past president of the Democratic Women of Williamson County and a member of the Georgetown Community Forum Board, where she has worked across the aisle holding community events and I lost my train of thought, where she's worked across the aisle holding community events that bring participants from both parties together. In 2018 and 2020, she ran for the United States Congress in Texas's 31st congressional district, advancing to the Democratic runoff in both races. Thank you, Dr. Mann, for being here. And our next guest is Elisa Cardnell. She's a single mom, a Navy veteran, and an educator. She's committed to advocating for policies and programs to support moms and working class families. Elisa attended Rice University, yay Rice, on a ROTC scholarship, earning her commission in the U.S. Navy upon graduation in 2007. Elisa served on active duty for 5 years, including a 7-month deployment to the Persian Gulf on a destroyer as the anti-submarine warfare officer. In 2012, Elisa transitioned to the reserves in order to return to Houston and to pursue a teaching career and spend more time with her young daughter. While serving in the reserves, Elisa was awarded the Reserve Officer Association Department of Texas's Sea Services, Navy Sea Services Outstanding Junior Officer of the Year for 2015-2016, and was selected for command of an operational support unit. Elisa taught for 6 years in both public and private schools in the Houston area, including a magnet school in Houston ISD and at a large suburban school in Spring Branch ISD. She taught math and physics, mostly at the high school level, and she earned recognition as her school's first-year Teacher of the Year in 2014. In 2018, the Navy told Elisa that she had too many pre-existing conditions to continue her service, and this led her to launching her campaign for the U.S. House of Representatives in Texas' 2nd Congressional District in early 2019 to advocate for universal health care, strong and safe schools, and to limit the influence of money in politics. She ran a grassroots campaign that eventually raised nearly $400,000 from over 5,000 donors and received more votes than any previous Democratic primary candidate advancing to a runoff. Elisa withdrew from the race prior to the runoff to allow her primary opponent to focus energy and money on the Republican incumbent. Since the end of her campaign, she's become the executive director for Moms in Office, a political action committee that is devoted to supporting moms run for office and the policies that will improve life for working moms and families. Recently, she also became the founder and president of EdStop, an educational nonprofit that is matching educators with students to develop the planning and organizational skills that are vital to success during virtual and traditional learning. So once again, thank you both for being here tonight. And
it's a pleasure.
And then with that, let's, I guess, get started. And I guess we could start with Dr. Mann. Why did you decide to run for office?
The short version, I was tired of death. I'm tired of seeing unnecessary death because of our healthcare system, our criminal justice system, our gun laws. We just have accepted and normalized that people are going to die unnecessarily, and we see it really strongly right now with the coronavirus crisis, where half of the country is just saying, oh, it doesn't exist or it's not important, and just brushing off the fact that we've had, what are we at, 180,000 deaths at this point. And I really felt like I wanted to be in a policymaking position. I help people live healthier lives and avoid unnecessary death in my practice. And I felt like I could do that in a larger arena by affecting policy by running for office.
Cool, thank you. And then Elisa, same question. Why did you decide to run for office?
So from my bio, you can tell that service is part of my story. And in fact, my dad was an Army officer and my mom was a teacher. So I was actually following in both of their footsteps with my two first careers. And so when the Navy told me I couldn't serve anymore, it was a huge blow. And I had to find a way to put all of that energy into serving my community in a way that I no longer could without my job in the reserves. So when Dan Crenshaw won Texas 2 in 2018, I was sitting there and I had watched great women run in Texas and beyond in the 2018 cycle, a lot of veterans. So including Elaine Luria in Virginia Beach, who is another surface warfare officer who beat a Navy SEAL. So we knew it could be done. Alyssa Slotkin, Mikey Sherrill, Chrissy Houlihan, all of those women. And they inspired me so that when I saw Dan Crenshaw win in this district that should be a swing district in a blue county in a purple state, I said, you know, why not me? Mm-hmm. And so it was a way for me to step up and continue my service in a new role.
Cool. And I mean, I'm going to say this again. I said this before we started. Like, I thought you were both great candidates, and you were my candidates in both respective races. So, so my next question: why did you decide specifically to run for Congress? There's many elected positions you could run for, from school board, city council, state office. Why Congress? And Dr. Mann, once again, back to you.
For me, it was because I wanted to choose the office where I could have the greatest effect that was also attainable. Like, I'm never going to run for president being just a doctor and coming out of nowhere. Senate as a statewide race is out of reach, but a congressional district, my congressional district, at least, is pretty compact. It's 2 counties for the most part. And I felt like I wanted to attain the highest level of office where I could be the most effective and help the most number of people. I also felt, as Elisa did, that this is a district that should have flipped. It's one that apathy is more of the reason that we haven't been able to remove the incumbent. And, I just decided that was the one that I was going to reach for in this regard. Now, I also am prohibited from running from other offices. I'm not eligible for city council, and state legislative races are really challenging for people who are not independently wealthy because the pay is so bad. And as a family practice doctor, I can't be gone from my practice for 6 months every 2 years to serve. So there were a number of factors, but the main thing is I wanted to be able to help the largest number of people that I could.
And then same question for you, Elisa.
For me, it was the right race at the right time. I'm not in politics because I'm personally ambitious. I wanted to make the community a better place and serve my community and my country like I had been doing. And again, similar to Dr. Mann, I got asked very frequently as a teacher, why aren't you running for the state legislature? And my answer was they only make $7,200 a year. And so they inherently attract folks who are independently wealthy or who work for companies that are happy they're there. And so we're generating incentive. Civilian legislators were coming up with conflict of interest legislators. Not that they're all bad. I have some wonderful friends that are serving in Austin right now. But for the vast majority of the history of the legislature, it has not been open to the average citizen to run for that office. And so Congress was something that I could pay the bills once I got in office as a single mom, but also with my military background, the national security piece is something that would qualify me for office at the national level.
Cool. Thank you. And then I guess my next question is a two-for. if you all don't mind saying like who the current incumbent is, right? And like I guess the reason you saw yourself as wanting to challenge this individual for the ills that they've begotten on their community, and why you felt like you were the right person, out of anyone and everyone who might have been running for that specific position, why you were the right person for that race. And Dr. Mann, once again.
So the incumbent in my district is Judge John Carter. He's been in office since the district was created. The district was created specifically for him and gerrymandered in a way that made it possible for him to not just win, but hold on to power for the 20 years that he's been in office. And the reason that I felt like I was the right person to take him on was because of all the things that I had been doing over the past more than a decade leading up to this. While I haven't held office before, I started working for other candidates back in 2007. Besides the things that were in my biography, I've sat on a number of other boards and commissions in the area. And I have helped elect numerous people. When my team and I sat down and looked at what we had done politically, between us, we had worked on 37 political campaigns. So we had a very broad base of knowledge and understanding on how to run a campaign. And there aren't a lot of people in my district as Democrats who have that.
Cool. And the same question for you, Elisa.
So the incumbent in Texas, too, is Dan Crenshaw, who actually right about now is at the RNC speaking from the White House. So hopefully folks are tuned in here because we're more interesting than hearing him spew the same things over and over again. And once again, not being home in his district. So as a Navy veteran, that was something that I knew was going to be very important in the race against Dan Crenshaw because that was his entire platform when he won in 2018. He refused to engage with the issues against the previous Democratic nominee because he would pivot everything to being a Navy SEAL. And the only person who was going to be able to go against him and match him and make him talk about issues was going to be another veteran. And I happened to be the same branch, the Navy. And then also by the end of the campaign, we had a grassroots campaign that had hundreds of volunteers. We had been to multiple events nearly every night. So hundreds of events by the time the campaign was over in just about a year. And we had over 5,000 donors, and we knew that we had the network of volunteers that were excited to work for me and my campaign and join the movement because that's what we really grew. It wasn't about me. It was about defeating Dan Crenshaw. And so by the end of the race, that combined with the Navy veteran aspect of my biography, we knew we were the right ones.
Cool. And then I want to ask. So I've worked on campaigns, and there's obviously a lot of highs, a lot of lows. I can't imagine running for office during a pandemic. I talk to friends who are currently still on campaigns, especially those that are doing field, and I'm like, I don't know how you're doing it, but wow, right? Because field is running a campaign is hard enough in general, but during a pandemic, I can't imagine being a candidate during a pandemic. So if y'all don't mind, I guess talking about like highs and lows of y'all's run. Dr. Mann, I guess have two different stories because you ran in 2018 and you obviously ran again in 2020. So I guess just some highs and lows of running, and then I guess if you want to also talk about how running in a pandemic was.
Well, for me, I absolutely loved running for office. I loved every minute of it, even the challenging stuff. I love politics. I love policy. I'm passionate about those things. I dream about policy, and I'm a super nerd where that comes in. So for me, it was just living my best life, getting to talk about policy and politics on a regular basis for 3.5 years through the 2 different campaigns was just fabulous. The lows for me were when people I had counted as part of my inner circle, Democrats who had been friends or colleagues or had worked with me on other issues, just turned their backs on me. And people that I had counted on and thought would be supportive of me running for office, and they were like, yeah, no. And you have to learn to deal with that very, very quickly when it happens, because if you do run, it is going to happen to you. People that you thought were in your corner are going to abandon you. And that's just part of running for office. So that was the hardest part.
And then just a quick question. How was 2018 different than 2020?
Oh, yeah. And I forgot to talk about the pandemic part of it. Oh, my gosh. 2020 was a lot different because I was considered the front runner. It was a shock to almost everybody that I didn't win the runoff, especially when I went into it in the lead. So that made a big difference. The first time I ran, I was running against a celebrity candidate, basically, and that's really, really hard. And it's hard when the whole institutional Democratic Party is behind the person that you're running against, and that was what my 2018 experience was like. 2020 was different than that. Again, people knew my name. I would make phone calls and people would say, yay, I'm glad you're running again. This is great. And then, when we get to the pandemic as a doctor, that was really hard to pull back from what we love to do. Elisa was talking about going to events. That was the best part, was getting to go to events and talk to people and talk about their concerns and what their policy preferences were. And to not be able to do that during the runoff was a real challenge. And then on top of it, for me, fundraising was grotesque. To even think about calling people when they were worried that their grandparent who was in a nursing home was going to get sick and die, or that they were going to lose their job. And here I am asking them for political money. And I didn't do it. My advisors really got upset with me for a while because I just put my foot down and said, this isn't right. And I'm going to hold off on this until we see where things kind of fall out. So campaigning during a pandemic it's not a good situation. Just like everything else we're dealing with in life, it's not good.
Yeah, I mean, I applaud you. I remember during that time, I would get emails from candidates who were like, hey, give us our fundraising deadline's coming up, chip in another $5. And I'm like, why? Or like, or like, I mean, I'm subscribed to like parties all over the country, and it'd be like, oh, one final push, can you give us an extra $100? And I'm like, we're in a pandemic, like the resources should be going towards that. Elisa, same question. What were some highs and lows of running for office?
Yeah, so I'm very much a people person. So for me, the best part was getting out there and meeting constituents. My team always told me if I could meet everyone in the district, I'd win hands down. But so I enjoyed traveling, honestly, from one side of the city to the other. And we are one of the most compact districts. We are all in Harris County. So even though we span the width of Houston from Braeswood to Kingwood, and we'd sometimes do that in one night, just getting to see all of these excited Democrats who had such energy from 2018, and it never stopped. I hit the ground running in January of 2019, and it just kept snowballing into more and more energy. And that was so much fun to watch as a candidate who was taking on one of the rising stars of the GOP and trying to make sure that his ascent did not get too high. So that was my favorite part, was meeting everyone. The lows, I didn't enjoy fundraising. I don't think anyone does. If they tell you they enjoy it, I think they're a little nuts. But part of that was we started out asking our friends and family for money. That's where you have to start. And I'm working class. And so that's what my personal network is. And asking another teacher to chip in $25, I know exactly how much that means in their monthly budget. And so it was very difficult to ask for that. It was actually much easier for me to call a random stranger who I know was a good Democratic donor, make the connection over the phone, and ask a random stranger essentially for money. That was a lot easier than asking my friends and family. But between that and the only other thing, this is a little bit of advice for anyone else who's considering running or putting themselves in the public eye, is don't feed the trolls. So one of the high points of our campaign was when Dan Crenshaw started tweeting about loaning his guns to friends without background checks. And we had our first little viral moment on Twitter, and our following went up massively, which was great because we started getting more attention and more money, right? So I didn't have to call as many folks. But what also happened is the trolls came out of the woodwork. Mm-hmm. And I'm pretty comfortable with who I am, but I have a thyroid condition, which is one of the reasons I left the Navy. And so I struggle with my weight, and having trolls online comment about my weight rather than my stances on policies was something that took some getting used to.
Yeah, that's, I mean, very unfortunate, and yeah, trolls are the worst. But yeah, I mean, thank you both for running. Like I can't say that enough. Like I am just having the courage to run, and Dr. Mann, in your case, running twice. I mean, I think you're both great public servants, and you're I mean, the long bios that I read about both of y'all, you know, it speaks for itself. And my next question, election night. Obviously, election night wasn't like most election nights. It wasn't. Well, I mean, I take that back. A few steps back. The election night itself was, but the runoff obviously wasn't. So, how was Elisa? I'll start with you this time. How was election night, right? Because that was like right before, I guess, COVID kind of hit. So I assume, like, I was on my way back from South Carolina, from working on the Warren campaign. So I was in my car. So, but how was election night on the ground in Houston in March?
Right, so that was March 3rd, and I know because the next day was my daughter's birthday, March 4th. So I had that date on my calendar for a long time. And so election night, we spent the entire day, we spent the morning at one of the biggest polling places here in Harris County, which is not far. It's at West Gray Community Center. But the lines there were too long. It was hard to get everyone. And so we actually spent a lot of time at my daughter's school because that's a polling place. So I was there. We met absolutely every single person in line. And so when the polls closed at 7, there were still folks in line. And so I continued talking to everyone down the line and introduced myself, got folks that were excited to vote for me. And by that point, it had gotten dark. I was on my feet all day, and I swear I was running on pure adrenaline at that point. So the actual election night was very anticlimactic because we had been putting so much effort into GOTV and that last minute push that really it was like, wait, we're done? What? Okay, polls are closed. Now let's see what's happening. And so my manager, Nick, and I actually walked back to his car, which was parked near the school. And as soon as we got there, we saw the early voting and mail-in votes count. And it wasn't what we were hoping for. So we were pretty much tuned in before the actual election night results came in that we were probably headed for a runoff, and we probably weren't going to be the lead vote getter. So we had that warning before we walked into our celebration, which for us was pretty small. There were a lot of races here in Houston, and so we didn't combine with any other candidates, but it was a lot of fun. It was a very close-knit group, and so that was very nice to watch all the other races. I had a lot of friends win, a lot of friends make runoffs, and so election night itself, we actually didn't stay out very late. We were all super tired, and yeah, I think anticlimactic, and just when the adrenaline wore off, we crashed. And then the next day we reconvened and figured out what was next.
Cool. And then Dr. Mann, you had an election night, but you also had a runoff, which was, I guess, a virtual election night. So how are both experiences?
Election night in March started out really, really great. I was 10 points ahead of the nearest competitor in early voting, which is just a huge margin to start off with. And we were really excited by that. And then sadly, as the night wore on, our margin kept shrinking, and we ended up about 5% ahead of the other candidate who ended up in the runoff. So it was a starting out as a real high and a real excitement that, wow, we're going to be in the lead. In 2018, I was the second place finisher going into a runoff, and this time I was going into a runoff in first place. And statistically, if you go into a runoff in first place, you're likely to win. And we had a couple of races in Texas that just flipped unexpectedly in the runoff piece of it. So we went into the runoff relatively confident. You can never in politics let your guard down, and you always know that there's a surprise around the corner. But going into it in the lead felt like not a shoo-in, but we felt strongly that we would be victorious. So when early voting came in on runoff night and we saw that we were a point or two behind, we knew right away too that was not going to be a good outcome, because if you're behind in early voting, it's hard to turn it around. It does happen sometimes, but we kind of read the writing on the walls pretty early, and it was pretty upsetting. It wasn't completely virtual for us. I did have my campaign team over here, and so we cried together and talked about what we wanted to do next after that. So yeah.
Yeah, I think working on it. I've only worked on one congressional race, to be fair, but I worked. I think I told you all before it started that I worked for Laura Moser's congressional race in Texas, the 7th, in 2018. And I think it's fair to say congressional campaigns are super small. They're super intimate, right? You get to know everyone really well, and we also made it to a runoff that we lost, and I just remember everyone hugging and crying on election night. And it was a great experience, and I've got most respect for Laura and everyone I worked with, but it's just one of those things that you never forget.
Yeah.
So this question is both of you will have a little bit of a different take on this. So election night happened. You both made it to runoff. Elisa, you decided to forego that runoff, and your runoff opponent automatically became the Democratic nominee. And then Christine, Dr. Mann, you made it to the runoff. And then you lost in that runoff. So I'll start with Elisa this time. Why did you decide to support your primary opponent for the general?
So I think I mentioned it very early on in this, that this was never really about me. This was about defeating Dan Crenshaw, and I thought I had the best chance, but we took it to the voters, and in the primary in March, we did not have a commanding lead. We weren't in front. And when she got nearly 50%, my opponent did in the primary. And so we were going to be the underdogs, both in a runoff and then again in November. And we decided that fundraising was going to be a beast, to be that far behind and try to raise money. And my opponent was a millionaire who could self-fund if she needed to. She could drop $50,000 or $100,000 of her own money in. And I don't have that in the bank. So we decided that to let my staff actually move on to other races. And that was the biggest driving factor, was making sure that they could land on their feet, because we could have kept going with a skeleton crew. And COVID wasn't really being talked about much at that point, although by the time we made our announcement, it was pretty clear that things were getting bad. But that didn't factor into our decision. And so we really just wanted to protect my staff and make sure they had a paycheck coming in, because I know how important that is. So to do that, and then I supported my opponent. In fact, I support her against Dan Crenshaw, because at the end of the day, he is a rising star who is nothing but fluff. He does not support the district. When Tropical Storm Imelda was rolling through last September, he was voting against renewing the National Flood Insurance Program. Right now, tonight, with another hurricane bearing down, and we could have been hit by a direct hit by Laura, but fortunately we haven't been. He's in DC. So he's not here. He's not representing the district. And so ultimately, at the end of the day, this needs to be a race where Dan Crenshaw loses. And the best way to do that was to let someone not spend a couple of months and several $100,000 fighting another Democrat.
Cool. And I want to applaud you, the comment you made about like giving your campaign staff an opportunity to, find another job. I mean, shout out to Nick, your campaign manager. He ended up getting on a race in Austin. He did a great job with that. And he's just a really good guy. Dr. Mann, same question. So yours is a little bit different. So do you want to, I guess, dive into that?
Sure. So in our case, we have a sitting representative who has been, we've been thinking is going to retire for a long time. He's not someone who's brand new on the scene. We know he has a shelf life that is almost over, and we do have opportunities down the road to defeat him. And unfortunately, in my race, the person that beat me has not been representing anyone. She does not answer phone calls. She no-shows to candidate forums. She's never held any online town halls. She has blocked. We're now at over 60 people. These are hardcore Democrats. These are activists in the community. These are precinct chairs. These are elected Democrats. And the current Democratic candidate will not allow those people to see her social media, engage in what she's doing. She will not answer emails from anyone who reaches out and says, hey, you know, we would love to get behind you and support you, but we really need you to engage with the people of the district. And, you know, I've always said that how you campaign is how you're going to govern. And so we have a candidate who is choosing to not represent anyone and who is cutting off the very people she would need to get herself elected. So we've been talking about it publicly. There have been a couple of newspaper articles about it locally. We've been trying to exert public pressure to get her to come and do her job. Engaging your constituents is the job. That is the job of a representative in Congress. They are the people who have the closest relationship to you in your district at the federal government level. And, you know, if you had an employee or a prospective employee come to you for a job and they no-showed on their job interviews and they didn't answer emails when you had questions and they blocked the people trying to reach them, you wouldn't hire that person for that job. So we're trying to exert public pressure to get her to come to the table. So far, it hasn't worked. Everybody that asks her gets an automatic block on social media, and that's just another person who's not going to help her win. So we would love to have her come to the table. She's never agreed to have a meeting with me ever. I started trying to talk with her before she even filed for the campaign, and she's refused to meet with people ever. And I had hoped that some of her supporters would reach out to her and say, look, we need to fix this situation. This isn't right what you're doing. We've got these people who want to get behind your campaign, and she just keeps refusing to do it. So I'm not going to support someone who has blocked me from any and all communications. That's just the bottom line.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really important to hold our elected officials accountable. It's also really important to hold those running to, you know, wanting to represent us accountable.
And I talk about that a lot, and I get a lot of pushback because we have this idea that any blue will do. And I understand that sentiment. I really, really do. But it is our job as citizens to hold those people accountable. We are not rubber stamps. We are not just people who say, okay, check, check, check. That is our jobs. We're not doing our jobs if we don't demand accountability from the people who seek to represent us.
No, that's very true. Thank you for that. So my next question. So I've said this before, and I'll say it again. You both are great. Future ambitions for office. I'll start with you, Dr. Mann. Are you thinking about running again, whether whether it be for Congress or any other sort of elected position?
Yeah, I absolutely am thinking about it. As I've said in this interview, I am passionate about politics and public policy, and driven to be a part of those conversations. It's not just a passing fad for me. It's something I've been doing for years. And so I will absolutely be considering running again, whether it's this seat or another. Redistricting is going to occur. And who knows what this district is going to look like after that. And that will play a role in my decision-making process, as well as what the margin looks like in the race in November, who is sitting in that seat. But I do have interest in other seats. But as both Elisa and I mentioned, there are some seats that are just not attainable for actual working people. And, I know as a doctor that I have privilege. I definitely have privilege above people who are working to teach our children. But you really do have to be independently wealthy to run for some of these seats. My opponent in this race is also self-funding. She has put in $200,000 of her own money, and it's very hard to compete with someone who can just keep putting in money and keep putting in money and keep putting in money. And we have too many of our elected offices that are that way, where money is the only thing that talks. So, but I'm definitely considering it somewhere down the road.
Thank you. I mean, and that's a great point. I think it's important. I mean, I wish there was a way to keep money out of politics, right? It's a very it's a easy thing to say. Like, you could put it on a bumper sticker. People will say it, when they run for office about keeping money out of politics, but unfortunately we don't see that, right? But regardless of your party affiliation, and that's why we don't see enough people who are like the Cori Bushes or the AOCs, because most people either have family wealth or they have their own wealth that they can prop themselves up and run for, whether it's state house or U.S. House. So, but yeah, thank you for that. Elisa, onto you. Same question.
Right. So for me, it has to be the right race at the right time. I haven't ruled anything out, but I haven't ruled anything in either. So again, like Dr. Mann mentioned, we'll have redistricting before the next round of elections. So looking at whether or not Houston has an open seat, or if Crenshaw is still in office, it's a possibility. But luckily, I'm very fortunate now that I'm no longer in the classroom, and my new roles post my campaign have allowed me to be in a position where if I do want to run for state legislature, it's not off the table next time. And then also Houston has some city council members that need to be held accountable. So there's lots of options, but it would have to be for the right reason at the right time. And so I'm really exploring my options. And in the meantime, I'm staying involved in my community and beyond.
And yeah, Houston has a lot of really bad city council members. So they definitely need to be held accountable. My last question before we get into some Q&A from the audience. What advice would you give to those looking to run for office in the future? And I guess we'll start off with you, Dr. Mann.
So the first thing I would tell you is that if you can't wrap your head around fundraising, I don't know really what to tell you, because the job of the candidate, the main job of a candidate is to raise money for an election. And if you don't know that going in, it's going to be a real slap in the face. For a congressional level seat, we're talking 30 plus hours a week on the phone asking for money. Elisa did it for a year. I did it for a little bit longer than that. And it's a grind. It is grueling. It is not fun. Trying to convince people that you've never seen before why you're the person that they should donate money to. So my advice, number one, is make sure you can wrap your head around that. Number two is to make sure you've got a very strong support network, because there are going to be bad days. There just are. And you need people who you can count on to build you back up and remind you of why you're doing it in the first place.
And then Elisa, same question.
That was all really great advice, and so I won't repeat it because I agree with it 100%. But I will add that as a teacher, I want to say do your homework. So you need to know everything about the race you are running for, so the seat that you are seeking, what the roles and responsibilities are, who's in it, why you're running against them. But the one question you're going to hear over and over and over is, why are you running? So you have to have an answer, not just the one that you tell people, but you have to, in your gut, have that thing that keeps you going for those 30 hours of call time a week. Yes. Because if you're not truly motivated, if you are not doing it for the right reasons in your own life, there's no way you're going to be able to convince anyone else that you're doing it for the right reasons for them either. The second thing is to grow a thick skin. Don't take things personally. This is really hard for me. I still let it get under my skin a little bit, but both the good things and the bad things. You're going to hear so much praise. You're going to have these moments where you connect with somebody and they are so excited to vote for you or donate to you or volunteer for you, and say thank you because you mean it. But know that also part of it's not you. Part of it is your campaign and what you represent to them. And from the flip side, people are going to hate you without ever having met you, just because if you're running as a Democrat, just because you have a D after your name. If you decide to run as a Republican, people are going to hate you just because you have an R after your name on the ballot. And that's the hardest part to wrap your head around for me, is the fact that folks have such hatred for people they've never met or interacted with. And I will say I've been in the same room as Dan Crenshaw, so I can say all those things about him.
Cool. Cool. Well, we have some questions, and if anyone who's currently watching has a question, please write it in the comment box. But I got some questions DM'd to me, and I'll start that off. So one question, and whoever wants to go at it first can. Who are some people running or elected that you admire or that inspire you? And whoever, Dr. Mann, you could start it off.
So I call myself a Katie Porter Democrat. I love Katie Porter. I love how she is laser focused on what she is doing, how she does not back down from the hard questions. And she's just, I've met her in person and I love her. I love Kamala Harris. I'm so excited that she is our vice presidential candidate. And I love her for the same reason that I love Katie Porter. I want to be that person in the room who sits there and knows their shit and asks the questions and doesn't let up until you get an answer. So those are kind of my role models in terms of what, in my mind, a representative of the people looks like. So yeah, those are my favorites.
Cool. Yeah, I'm a huge Katie Porter fan. She was a law student of Senator Warren's, and she endorsed Senator Warren. Mm-hmm. So when working for Senator Warren and seeing that endorsement, nothing but love for Katie Porter. Mm-hmm. Lisa, same question.
Can I say you stole one of mine?
Yes.
She is, Katie Porter is one of our favorite candidates at Moms in Office. So she's one of our endorsed candidates. And so we love her. But I've got to say, I made some really close friends on the campaign trail here in Houston. I've got to give a huge shout out to Michelle Palmer, who is the only teacher running for State Board of Education in the area. And so she's running for State Board of Education position 6. So it's a large part of Harris County. She is an educator, she is a teacher, and she has been talking about changing the curriculum to be inclusive since before it was part of the national conversation. So I'm really proud of her. I love her. And I think that we need a teacher involved in decisions about education. That's something that's very important to me at the local level. And I have to say, I am all about holding Democrats accountable. And someone here in Houston who's gotten a lot of flack for her actions, but has really been brave and unafraid to stand up to that criticism and do the right thing in spite of it, is Lena Hidalgo.
Yeah, Judge Hidalgo's doing a great job. So before I get back to some of the questions that was DM'd, we got an audience question. How do you get rid of, this is from Cumber Joffrey, how do you get rid of dirty money out of politics? Why in a democracy are we still stuck with only 2 parties? Elisa, you could start this one off.
Sure. So there were 2 parts to that. And the first one's about dirty money in politics. And the first thing we can do is transparency, right? So if we are fully transparent about who's funding our elections, whether that's to a PAC or whether that's to a candidate, we can't necessarily get rid of it by doing that, but that is a great first step to see where that money is coming from. There is a growing movement of candidates who are not taking corporate PAC money. I was one of those. In fact, the only PAC I took money from is the one I'm now working for, Moms in Office, because they're the only group willing to even give me money. But that's another story. And I do think that making sure that we overturn Citizens United is a decision that we need to. Corporations are not people when it comes to politics, right? They don't get a vote, so they shouldn't get a say in how our elections are funded either. As to the second question, what was it again?
Why in a democracy are we still stuck with only two parties?
Right. So I was a poli-sci major at Rice, so you'll forgive me if I get a little nerdy, but essentially we're in a first past the post system. And so when you're in a system like that, you are going to have two parties that inevitably end up being the powerhouses, because there's no way for anything except a runoff to get a third party vote to really count for anything. And so that's where things like ranked choice voting come in handy, where if you could select your first choice candidate, so say you really hate both the primary parties folks, which is reasonable, right? You might not agree with either of them fully. And so you want to vote third party, but if you're in a swing state or a swing district, that can really cost whoever your second choice would be, that can cost them the election. So instituting ranked choice voting would be a solution here that would allow us to have third parties that actually are viable. Unfortunately, when money drives so much of politics and all of that money resides with the two main parties, and there's no structural incentive to change it, they're not going to.
Dr. Mann, same question.
Yeah, I would go even further than what Elisa said. For me, the ideal election would be publicly funded and 6 weeks long. Get in, get it done, run on issues and not on who can raise the most money in the shortest amount of time. So I would really overhaul the whole system if I could wave a magic wand and make it run the way that I want it to. And the issue that prohibits that is that there is just like there's a military industrial complex, there's a political industrial complex. There are just thousands of people who make a lot of money on our current political system who would have to find other employment, and the people who make the money at the top would lose that money, and they're very powerful, and they have the ability to lobby our lawmakers and keep that from happening. But if you really, really wanted to have a system that was transparent and viable, it would need to be publicly funded and in a shorter period of time. And, you know, tagging on to what Elisa said about the two-party system, I 100% agree with having ranked choice voting. I really wish we could get there. I also kind of like in California, they've got jungle primaries where even just the top two candidates, no matter what party they are from, advance into runoff. So there are ways to change the dynamic within the two-party system, but money drives everything, and those two parties have a lock on our system right now.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point. I always find California elections so interesting because you'll have at times, if it's a competitive district, you'll have a Republican and a Democrat. Otherwise, you'll just have two Democrats going at it or two Republicans going at it. Our next question is from Ryan Geinert. His question is, any tips for someone who has ran national campaigns, been a candidate in the past, and just moved to Austin? How should I get involved beyond donating, writing postcards, and making calls? And Dr. Mann, you could start this one off.
So there's a pretty active Democratic Party. There's also a very active DSA if you're a Democratic Socialist. I'm not going to presume what party you're from, Ryan. And both of those groups have many, many opportunities. Like you can become a party officer or a precinct chair within the party locally, and that would get you connections to other people within the party. Most of them have subcommittees and working groups that you can be involved in. So you don't have to directly be involved with a candidate to get involved. You can get involved with whatever your party structure is, and try and make some inroads that way, especially if you're thinking about running down the road. Austin Proper is pretty tough because there's a bench of Democrats. There's a hierarchy of people who are going to step up and replace and step up and replace and step up and replace. So you kind of have to get in on the ground floor, go to some meetings, virtual meetings right now, and get to know who the major players are so that you can start to advance through the ranks over time.
Cool. And then Elisa, if you want to answer this question too. Maybe not.
I don't really have too much to add.
Yeah.
I think 90% of it is showing up somewhere. And right now, like Dr. Mann mentioned, that's going to be virtual. So finding those clubs and orgs. Here in Houston, most sections of the city have a Democratic club that you can get involved with. Most of them have Facebook groups. So I'm not familiar with the ones in Austin since I ran here in Houston. But they are all very welcoming. If you show up, you're engaged, you're willing to do things, whether it's apartment lit dropping or whether it's getting folks registered to vote, whether it's phone banking. Those are all things you can do for the party, or you can do for some of the clubs have been working on getting folks mail-in ballots and having those applications sent in early, because we know that the postal system is pretty slow right now. But really 90% of it's showing up and the other 10% is being authentic.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And as someone who lived in Houston for a year and a half, great clubs, and especially in Texas too. I went to so many different club meetings, and the county party itself is great. So another question that was just DM'd to me. What would you say to someone who said, "What's the point in voting or running for office? How can we get the general public excited for politics the way we are?" And then Elisa, you could start this one off.
So you don't have to be necessarily excited about voting, but here's the thing. If you don't think politics apply to you, your boss thinks they do, and your landlord thinks they do, and the folks that are running city council behind the scenes because they're the ones donating to it, they do. So if you want to have working class folks, which I don't know anything about the person sending this question in, but the vast majority of us are working class that vote. And so our vote counts just as much as that person who can donate. But if you don't get out there and vote for the candidate that's best going to represent you in whatever office it is, whether it's at the top of the ticket or at the bottom, I think that that's something that you have to be aware of. The other thing is it's not necessarily all about the top of the ticket. While this year in particular, it's very important that we get rid of President 45. I think that if you can find one candidate down ballot, right? Whether it's my friend Michelle, who's running for State Board of Education, whether it's someone running for a judge position who they don't get a lot of funding and so they don't have huge campaign ads or TV spots, find that one candidate who somehow speaks to you and then just vote the rest of the ticket, right? Go out for your friend and you'll find other folks along the way. It's a little harder now that we're all stuck at home, but once you know one, they'll introduce you to the others.
Same question for you, Dr. Mann.
Yeah, I'm going to pick up on a little bit of what Elisa was talking about, where local candidates are concerned. In the city that is adjacent to where I live, Cedar Park, we had a city council woman be defeated by one vote in the last election. And the person that defeated her is not just crazy as in, oh, they're crazy. Like, they have accused Indivisible, which is a very well-known national group, of being literal witches. Like, he went out on the full moon and tried to bless the city to keep the witches from Indivisible from taking over the city. So one vote put this person on the city council. My friend, who also was my campaign manager, ran for city council. She lost by 15 votes. So these local elections desperately need people to who care about their city, who care about their county, who care about their state. They desperately need us to make that leap to understand why politics is important to them, because you may not care about politics, but politics cares about you. And Elisa was exactly correct that your boss and your landlord, they understand exactly how important politics is. That's why they're sinking tons of money into it. And that's why they make sure they vote and all their family members vote. If it wasn't important, your landlord and your boss wouldn't be doing it. I need you to think of it as just as important.
Yeah, very true. And I can't, I mean, you kind of hit the nail on the head, but I can't say enough how important local politics are, right? From school board to city council to county commission. They're not the sexiest positions to run for, but they're so, like, they affect you on your day-to-day basis. And I just want to give a quick shout out to your former staffer, Tiffany Harrison. She's running for Round Rock ISD. Yeah. Yep. So yeah, shout out to Tiffany.
I'm going to drag everyone in Round Rock to the polls to vote for Tiffany.
That's great. No, it's great seeing good people uplift good people. Mm-hmm. So we have 5 minutes left, and I had 2 questions just sent to me. One is just specifically for you, Dr. Mann. The question is, can you tell us your perspective as a physician about COVID-19 and how it's being portrayed in politics/media? How do you think it should have been handled from the start?
It's been a debacle of epic proportions. And I don't mean just the media. The media has actually done a decent job if you watch the mainstream media. The far-right media has been crazy. But the handling of this pandemic has been a complete disaster from start to finish. It's still a disaster. I was just talking to my office manager today. We're running short on the gowns that I need to do the testing for COVID-19. We constantly have to worry about whether or not we're going to have a test kit still 6 months into it. And it's been run horribly. Tens of thousands of people of Americans have died that wouldn't have died if we had had a proper response to this pandemic. As a physician, I'm furious about it. And I talked about it quite often after the pandemic started. In fact, I had 16 weekly town halls where we spent most of the time talking about COVID-19 and the disaster from the management of it from the federal government.
Cool, thank you. And then Elisa, there's a question that's very specific to you. How has your background as a veteran and as a mother influenced your plans and dreams for policy change?
I think they drove a lot of what my platform was. So especially being a mom, it really changes your outlook on life. And when I would tell a story, whether it was for common sense gun laws, when my daughter, she's not in school right now, obviously, but I would drop her off every day and I'd say, I love you, have fun. Because that had to be the last thing I said to her every day, because I never knew if tragedy would strike. And just telling that story made such a connection with people because it's a universal feeling. All moms worry about their kids. And so when you have to face that on a daily basis just because your kid's going to school, I think that was something that was very, very real to me and to everyone I talk to. It's very clear that that's a very visceral reaction. And so everything is that I had a policy platform on, it first comes from, okay, what's my experience with this? And as someone who's working class, who doesn't have a month's worth of savings in the bank, right? So folks that are looking to recover after a hurricane, we have to make sure the government's stepping in to help because so many of us live paycheck to paycheck, right? We have to make sure that the response to that's great. We have to make sure we have healthcare that's not tied to our jobs, because otherwise, when the pandemic hits and you no longer have a job, exactly when you need healthcare, right? Then so many folks are up a creek without a paddle. And so all of these policy decisions that really, I did not say anything on the campaign trail that I didn't believe in. And that's very important to be authentic. Anyone who's considering running for office, you have to 100% believe things you're going to say. If you don't...
Dr. Mann, are you there?
I'm here. Looks like we lost her. Yeah.
Yeah. No.
Oh, am I back?
Oh, yay, you're back.
Oh, you're back. Yay.
I think that was the clue. I was talking too long. Honestly, yeah, I think all of my policy decisions came out of personal experiences or those of the people around me or watching my students. So I know that wasn't part of the question, but being a teacher and seeing a lot of low-income families that I wasn't necessarily close to in my personal life, but I saw through my professional one was very eye-opening. So that's how I made my platform.
Cool. So one last question before we call it a night, and this is for both of y'all. What was the experience of like running for an elected position as a woman? Obviously, there are biases with many things, including gender. Dr. Mann, I'll let you kick this one off.
It's interesting. What was most interesting is that a lot of the criticisms that I took as a woman came from other Democratic women. There was just a lot of, why are you wearing that? And why does your hair look like that? And your makeup isn't right. And where's your jacket? And just, that is just, it's part of running as a woman. And we see it in our national candidates and the way that the female candidates are treated. And it trickles all the way down to these down ballot races. So it is what it is. I don't like that it's that way, but it's never going to inhibit me from doing it again. If I do choose to do it, it won't because of that.
Yeah, I think my biggest criticism was from another Democratic woman who told me that I should lose weight. Otherwise, no one would take my status as a veteran seriously. Because apparently once you're out, you can't put on weight because of medical conditions. But that was probably a very low moment. And I don't think a man would have ever been told that. However, I will say running as a single mom was very, very unique experience. I got a lot of questions about how I did that. And I have to say that I think we were, if not the first, we were one of the first campaigns to have a nanny as part of our staff. Because we mentioned it earlier, call time is 30 hours a week. That was my day job. And then we would traverse Harris County from Braeswood to Kingwood, going from multiple events a night, almost every day of the week. And so we had to make sure that my daughter, who is now, she turned 9 the day after Super Tuesday. So she was 8 for most of my campaign. We had to make sure someone was at home with her. And so making sure that folks that have childcare, or folks that need childcare during the campaign, that's something that we dealt with in a very new way based on some of the decisions made in 2018 by the FEC. So we were able to take advantage of that. And so it's a unique part of being a woman, but for me, that's a huge part of who I am as being a single mom. And that was probably the biggest unique experience, I think, that would be different than even a single dad running for office. Usually they have someone, I mean, they need childcare too, but yeah.
True. Well, I want to thank you guys, well, first and foremost for running for office. And I think what we kind of ended this with, I think as a country, we need to elect more women. But thank you guys for running for office. And thank you guys for joining tonight in this very spirited and honestly wonderful discussion. I hope you guys continue to stay safe from this horrific pandemic that our country is in. And hopefully, Elisa, I know you're in the Houston area, like, stay safe from the hurricane that's happening. And like I said, thoughts and prayers for everyone in Hurricane Laura's path, and just praying for justice for the innocent Black and brown folks who are killed on a daily basis. So yeah, thank you so much, and I'll talk to you guys later.
All right, thanks, Zohaib.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.